Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got another thrift store amp find, and I can see the problem with it right off the bat. It's definitely got a broken knob here, so I'm going to show you how to replace that. In the process, we'll check it out and make sure nothing else is wrong with it. This is a Squier Champ 15, which is a pretty common amp from probably the early 2000s. It's got an external speaker jack, a headphone jack, 2 inputs, and the normal gain and equalizer functions. So no reverb, no frills, but it's a pretty basic bedroom amp. This one's dirty and it needs a cleanup, but I haven't even turned this thing on yet. So let's go ahead and turn it on and make sure all the functions work. Okay, right off the bat, it's making a little bit of noise, but that's fine. The guitar's really close to it right now. Let's just make sure all the functions work. Alright, well everything's working and it actually doesn't even have scratchy pots, maybe just a little bit in the gain channel. I think the bass knob isn't doing a whole lot, but that's not really surprising to me. And the gain in these little amps kind of sounds a little bit farty is the best word that I can use for it. It just doesn't sound like real distortion or real overdrive. It sounds very electronic. At any rate, let's start cleaning this thing up, and I'm going to tear it down. We're going to do a pot replacement. We're going to clean the rest of the pots, and then we'll put it back together, and it should be a quick video today. Okay, the very first thing we're going to do is give it a good vacuuming, because I really don't want to push a bunch of dirt around. I want to get as much off before I start cleaning with anything wet. I'll do more vacuuming on the inside, but after the initial vacuuming, I want to go ahead and take off the handle, and then we're going to start cleaning the case. Now most of the time on the case itself, I use a standard degreaser, and it's household strength, but you can always use something a little bit more stout if your case is really dirty. Alright, now what we need to do is take the back of the case off, and then we can work on getting this head out. Now most of the time these backs don't just fall off, you kind of have to pry on them a little bit, so I often put the screws back in just a little bit. Now I use that for leverage and try to pull down. Now there's usually a few screws that have to come out for the case to come completely apart. I'm not sure I'll do that yet. Let me look at the screw connections, but you definitely have to take off this cord clip, and there's usually a couple of screws that go from the head into the baffle board. Okay, I don't think I'm going to have to take everything apart. You have to take the 2 speaker connections off. Just make sure you remember which one's which. This speaker does happen to be marked positive and negative, so positive is the white wire. Well, I wasn't going to do this initially, but I think I will take the baffle out just because it looks like it's going to be easier to do it that way. Now to replace that pot, I actually have to take this board out of the head itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove all the knobs, and then we can get all the screws off of the pots. Okay, there's multiple ways you could attack this now. I'm going to take a few things apart here. I'm going to shake off the wires for the switch here, probably remove the transformer wires. I'll probably cut this wire tie, and then I'll unclip all these connections from the board. Then I'll need to remove 2 screws on the bottom for the heatsink, and I think the whole thing will just come right out. In fact, let me get those screws now. Alright, now these pots, they solder in on the bottom of the board here. They all line up across the front, and there's 3 prongs for each one. And what you need to do to get one of these things out is to desolder the points that are already soldered in. To do that, I'm going to use a desoldering wick and of course a soldering iron. Okay, once that's done, the pot's actually really loose. It just falls right out. So that's my preferred method. You can also use a desoldering bulb or a solder sucker. There are multiple ways to get that out, but it's pretty easy. And then after it's all out, I want to go ahead and clean up the board just a little bit, scrape those connections off, get them ready for the new pot. Okay, I'm not scraping very hard. I just wanted to get some of the old resin off. Now this is a 5K pot, it looks like. But to go back in place of the old pot, you need a pot that's almost exactly the same dimensions. And these are the little metric, I believe 6mm pots. So that's what I'm going to use to replace it. Well, as it turns out, I did have a 5K pot, so I can go back with exactly what was in it. Okay, and then putting this on is exactly the same way as it came off. You just have to heat some solder up and melt some solder on the new posts, and you don't have to cut anything. Now if you're doing this, I assume you know how to solder, but I'm using a soldering station and pretty standard 60-40 rosin core solder. There's one other difference I can see in the new pot versus the old pot, and it's a little grounding lug that's sticking up, and I'm just going to cut that off really fast. Now I'll get rid of this broken pot, and I'll just put it back together the same way it came apart. When you get done with this step, just take a breath and make sure you got all your connections back where they were supposed to go. Once you're positive, this thing can go back in the case. Now here's a good tip. Before you put this thing too much back together, go ahead and plug it in and make sure everything works, because it kind of stinks to have to pull all your knobs off again and pull that back plate off again. Alright, it is working as supposed to, but I also remembered I forgot to clean those pots, so let me do that real fast before I totally throw that back plate on. See, I did that for a reason. Now since I'm going to be in here again, I'm going to go unplug. Alright, I'm going to be using some contact cleaner, and there's a little access hole in the back of each one of these pots that you can get into, and that's how I'm going to get in there. Spray a little bit of cleaner in there and then work the pot back and forth. That's all I'm doing. If you're thinking this would have been easier to do when this was on the bench and not inside the amp, you're right, but I just forgot. Okay, now I don't actually have the knob that came off of this pot that broke, so I'm going to put some aftermarket knobs on here, and I actually don't have 6 of the same color, so I'm just going to alternate. I happen to have some red and blue ones, so we'll use those. Okay, those don't look too bad, and I'll save the original ones for my next project. And the last thing that goes back on is this back plate. Alright, well that's it for this little amp today. It's in pretty good fighting shape now, so I think it's going to do the next owner very well. I'll probably go ahead and glue this little piece of Tolex down on the corner, but I won't bother showing that on camera. I thank you all for hanging out with me again. I appreciate all the likes and all the comments. Be sure to check out Hack's Guitar Hobby on Facebook. Look in my description for the links to all the parts in the episode. You can find those on Amazon or eBay. And remember, if you use my links, you help me out. And you can help me out even if you're not buying items that I put in the description just by using the links. I especially want to thank all my subscribers, and I'll see you guys next time.